the Thrive by 5 online forum, giving kids a head start in life. It's my great pleasure today to be your host for this event. And it's an event where we hope to explore the critical importance of the early years, and in particular, the way in which preschool, kindergarten can make a massive contribution to not only the learning trajectory of our children, but also their health and well-being. This has been an incredibly topical event. It's now very much in the public sphere. And tonight's an opportunity to listen to experts in the area, but also to hear the voice of teachers who play such a critical role in this system. Today we have a range of fantastic speakers. Correna Haythorpe, of course, your president of the AEU, Michele O'Neil, president of the ACTU, Nichole Jenkins, a kindergarten teacher and leader of a community kindergarten, and of course Dr. Jen Jackson, who has been a policy maker and leading thinker in this area. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin by acknowledging that we gather on the traditional lands, at least I do, in my home state of Perth, of the Wadjuk people as part of the Noongar Nation. And I know that all of us are gathered around this nation on traditional lands. We acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. And the Aboriginal voice is, of course, a critical one in this whole debate, and one that we also want to elicit and to hear from during the course of these discussions. So we're recording the session to be uploaded online later. For those of you who haven't been to one of these events, they're designed to be interactive, to be respectful and inclusive. So bear in mind those principles when you're making a contribution. A few things to give you the best experience. We encourage you to keep your video on. We found it really does add to the sense of being together that Zoom facilitates. If you're on a computer or laptop, you can set your screen to gallery view by clicking the button at the top right-hand side, and that just gives you this idea that there's you're amongst a lot of people, and it's great to see the numbers that are joining today. So there is a chat function. Please use it to ask questions or to make a comment, and we welcome you to introduce yourself so that we know who's in the room. So everyone is muted, and an admin will unmute you if you're called on in the Q&A process. And if there are any technical issues, just send a private message through the chat function. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We'll kick off with Michele O'Neil. As I said before, Michele is president of the ACTU. And in July, the ACTU launched their plan for jobs-led reconstruction in the post-pandemic world. A key pillar of that plan was early childhood education and care. And my first question to Michele is, can you tell us about this strategy and why you believe, and the ACTU believes, that this must be a priority for economic reconstruction in the post-COVID era? Thank you, Michele.
Thanks very much, Jay, and hi everyone. Great to see you all. I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and it always has been and always will be Aboriginal land. And yes, that means I'm here in Melbourne on the cusp of, somebody just told me I could go out for a drink at midnight, but I'm not going to. So yeah, it is good to see you, and thanks for that question, Jay. We, as the pandemic was reaching its peak and we were seeing the devastating economic impact for working people around the country, we did work across all of our unions in saying, well, what needs to happen for the recovery of our economy and of course the recovery of our society, and what does that mean in terms of jobs? And when we started to think about that, we knew that it was really important that the jobs that we had a plan for, and what we called this was a national economic reconstruction plan, that they were jobs where we were really wanting to see delivering for the public sector as well as the private sector, for women and men, for people in country towns as well as cities, and for younger workers as well as older workers. And we understood that the government had to put significant funds in, and still does, for us to properly be able to recover because of the damage that's been done to the economy. And when we started to think through that, we'd also looked at what was happening, of course, with the temporary introduction of free childcare in the middle of the pandemic, and then its rapid removal by the government. And we saw that the sectors of early childhood education and care and preschool as a critical part of that were so crucial to recovery, not just because of the sector itself, but because of all of the other impacts and roles that it plays. And so we really saw that, firstly, because we saw what an important role it played in terms of women workers, both in as far as workers in the sector, and the vast bulk of workers in the sector are women, but also because of how important it is about women being able to participate in the labour market and be able to take up opportunities for jobs. And if we don't have great quality childcare and early childhood education and care and great quality preschools, then of course that really diminishes women's ability to be able to work and get into the workforce. So we saw that that what was happening for women in the labour market is that the pandemic had really hit women differently, and that more women had lost hours and jobs, but also had taken up a whole lot of the other home and caring responsibilities that came about with things like schooling happening from home as well. So that was a critical part of why we saw that the reintroduction of universal free childcare should be a central element of what we were seeing needed to be part of this national economic plan. So we put it there, and we saw that it was critical because what we knew is that it was going to both create jobs and provide opportunities to jobs. And we also knew that Australia, comparatively to other countries, our labour force participation of women is much lower. And so if you get more women in the workforce, it's actually really good for the economy as well. But also what we knew is the quality of the work you do, the critical role that preschool and early childhood education plays in our children, and the undervaluation of workers in this sector. So when we started to unpack what needed to happen, we saw we wanted to see that reintroduction of care, and we put as essential to that the funding of universal access to 15 hours of preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds. And we knew this was a really important measure because it plays such an important role in the development of our children. It sets them up for life, literally. It's when your brain is developing the most, more than it ever will at any other time in your life, and both the educational outcomes and social outcomes you get from great quality education at that age makes a difference. So we wanted to recognise the role of teachers, recognise the role of early childhood educators and support staff in this sector, make sure it's funded properly, make sure it's universal, and importantly, make sure that there's a re-evaluation of the work that you do, because it has been so undervalued for so long, and it makes no sense that we don't put this as central to what's necessary for our children as well as our society. So Jay, I'm going to stop there, and there's lots more I could say about why this is critical to this, but I want to hear from everybody else and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks, Jay.
Right, thank you, Michele, and also thanks for your leadership in actually putting this front and centre. I don't think there's any mistake that the reason why this issue is now very firmly on the national political agenda is because of the leadership role that you and the ACTU played. So congratulations on that. Can I now introduce Correna Haythorpe, who requires no introduction to many of you. Of course, she's president of your union, the AEU. She's been campaigning for ongoing funding for universal access for 15 hours indeed, of preschool for all 4-year-olds. We know we're on the yearly sort of drip feed of that national partnership. And she's also been a strong advocate for extending the universal access to 3-year-olds. And I, of course, met Correna when she was a leader in the South Australian branch of the AEU, and has always been a powerful and articulate advocate on behalf of teachers. So, Correna, welcome. And can you just explain why, from your perspective, is this issue important to your members, and what are the main challenges they're facing at the moment?
Thanks very much, Jane. Thank you for your very kind introduction. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining this meeting from Ghana country here on the beautiful Adelaide Plains, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, many of whom are children and students in public education right now around the country. And I'd also like to acknowledge the elders on the land on which you are situated as you join this meeting. And good evening to our other guest speakers tonight. Jay, in terms of our campaign, we have been campaigning now for many years to secure ongoing funding in terms of universal access for all 4-year-olds, and to have that extended to all 3-year-olds, because fundamentally, everything that we do as a union is about the right of a child to accessible, free, quality public education. And early childhood education has to be seen as an integral part of that right, one that sits within the public education system as a whole, delivering universal access to preschool that is culturally safe, that is inclusive and free for all 4-year-olds and for 3-year-olds. From our perspective, we believe wholeheartedly that early childhood education not only prepares a child for school, but it's part of lifelong learning in terms of their educational journey. It provides the foundational skills, the competencies and the confidence for young learners as they start to develop their sense of self, as they start to engage with learning, particularly for children who come from a low socioeconomic background, for children who are from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background, or who have a disability or whose first language is not English. Those foundational years, those early years, are just so critically important to them as part of their ongoing education. And that's something that's very deeply felt and understood by our members right around the country, not only in preschools, but also in schools and TAFE, as we campaign together for a strong public education sector. Children who attend preschool begin school with better physical, mental and emotional well-being than those who have not attended preschool. We know that they're more likely to succeed across all parts of the formal education system. They're more likely to undertake post-secondary education, and learning begins in infancy long before their formal education begins, which is why the Thrive by 5 campaign that we're all part of, the campaign to ensure early childhood education and care, is so critically important for Australia. Australia lags behind much of the world when it comes to funding preschool in particular. World Bank data shows that the vast majority of countries provide 2 or 3 years indeed of pre-primary education. But here in Australia, we only offer 1 year of preschool, and that's a huge concern for us and why we hit the campaign trail to secure those commitments from governments. There are strong educational and economic arguments about the need to invest, but it's just been so disappointing that those arguments have not been heard by the Commonwealth in particular, and that this year the budget once again failed to deliver universal access, and that creates deep uncertainty for our members. It creates uncertainty in terms of their employment, it creates insecure work, it creates uncertainty in terms of the funding needed for their professional development, for appropriate remuneration, time for planning, teaching and learning. And uncertainty of funding, it's a key issue for children and their families. And I think as part of our campaign, our strong ask is for governments to work together on delivering this funding, because they need to understand that you can't fund the future 1 year at a time.
Thank you very much, Correna, for that contribution. And now, before I go to Dr. Jen Jackson, could I encourage people that are online, if they have any questions, to put them into the chat function, and they can be questions which go to the nature of the campaign we're seeking to run, questions about what role, if any, you think the campaign should be engaged in, or any suggestions about what role people feel they might be able to play themselves, and any questions about shaping that. So don't hesitate to use the chat function, and we'll certainly go to you. Or you can either read out your questions yourself, or somebody can read them for you. Now, it's my great pleasure to go to Dr. Jen Jackson. Jen's key interest is in evidence-based policy that delivers an educational system that delivers for children. Her expertise covers all levels of education. Jen has previously worked in early childhood policy and regulation and completed her PhD on early childhood workforce development. She's worked with government, universities and various research bodies, and most recently has been working on an important further education project. Jen, welcome. And can I ask you this question? What does your research highlight about the importance of investing in early childhood education, and what are the main barriers for the sector at the moment?
Look, thanks, Jay, and to the other panelists. That's a huge question for 5 minutes. I'll begin though by saying I'm joining you from Richmond in Melbourne, so I'm also on Wurundjeri country. I'd like to acknowledge elders, the children who will one day become elders, and the parents, communities, educators and teachers who will nurture those children. It's wonderful speaking to a group of early childhood educators. I have a colleague who's a university professor said to me the other day, I want to be able to tell my grandchildren that I did something good during the pandemic. I did something worthwhile. And I think speaking to a group of people who are actually educating and caring for children and supporting families to get through it, it's very humbling, and I want to express my admiration for you all and what you contributed to that essential service. What I've been up to is my job is translating research for a government of both persuasions. So trying to get them to see how important investing in the early years is. So I'm going to come at this from 3 angles for you. Firstly, it's important for education. Second, it's important for the economy. And third, it's important for society. So, important for education. Now, Corinna's done a great job of covering off what we know about the benefits of high quality preschool programs, especially 2 years of preschool or more for children's later learning and development. And I think parents are starting to get that message too. So recent Front Project research has investigated what matters to families in early childhood services, and they've said it's the benefits for children's learning and development that is actually key. Where I see a barrier is we need to let governments know that this doesn't just happen. You don't just get the benefits by showing up. And it's actually the work that you guys do. It's the little things that are the big things. It's how you talk to a child. It's how you set up the room. It's how you observe them, how you assess them. That's where the impact happens, and that needs investment. So I think we need to keep telling that story, that it's not just the access, it's the quality as well. Okay, second point, important for the economy. Now, Michelle's mentioned there's been a lot of talk lately about the care economy, its benefits for economic recovery, women's participation in the workforce. There's been OECD research, so big international research, saying you get better benefits by investing in care than you do investing in building and construction. So a lot to think about there for governments, but they're talking about care, and it needs to be education and care. All that research doesn't take into account the economic benefits from children's learning and development. So you've got these 2 streams of economic benefits that have got to be brought together, and that education and care story has got to be tied together so strongly. And the professionalization and the recognition of the work that you guys do is an important part of that story. Okay, third point, and I'm going to go a bit highbrow, big picture here, so bear with me. But COVID-19 has got a lot of people thinking about what sort of society do we want in Australia? Okay, you've probably had these sorts of conversations yourself, particularly early in the pandemic. How do we want people to relate to one another? How do we want people to feel included, to feel recognised? When a child walks into an early childhood service, that's their first impression of society outside their family, what they experience in that room. Now, if that child is supported to connect, to contribute, to be curious, to be creative, to be collaborative, to be kind, to be culturally safe. That experience that that child has is going to contribute to how they engage with the world throughout the rest of their life. So that little society that you create in your rooms every single day is a precursor, it's a taste of what's to come with the Australian society that we're going to have down the track. Now that's a big concept, and where I'm going to go to for the barrier on that one is I actually don't think governments get that. I reckon we've actually not gone big enough with our vision for what early childhood services are and what they can be, and how our investment in early childhood actually reflects how we value children and how we value their contribution to the future. So that's a big thought to take away. But I think now actually governments are interested in big ideas. I'm sure Michele and Correna and Jay, in your conversations with government, you've heard a bit of appetite for a bit of big picture thinking. And I think there are some really great opportunities here for the early childhood sector and the teachers and the educators to really be out there talking about your value and hopefully seeing that recognised. Thanks, Jay.
Yes. Well, thank you, Jen. That's a really powerful vision and a great provocation, I think, for people to react to. So I encourage you to get into the chat and any questions you may have. Now, it's also time now to hear from one of you as a teacher, a kindergarten teacher and a leader at a kindergarten. Welcome, Nichole Jenkins is a leader in a community-based kindergarten with 15 years of experience, and she's very kindly agreed to join us from Melbourne and to share her experience and expertise. So my question for you, Nichole, from your perspective, what impact does the uncertainty of funding that we have at the moment, what effect does that have on you? So we've had these 7, I think, years of national partnerships being rolled over for a year each time. And what does that mean for students and families in your kindergarten? And what do we need to do to change that?
Thank you, Jay. First of all, I will just let you know that I'm on Burrarung land here in Melbourne, and I like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So as Jay said, I'm a kindergarten teacher with 15 years experience. I was teaching before the 15 years of kindergarten, 15 hours of kindergarten was rolled out, and I have seen a significant difference in children's readiness for school and how that's impacted them. As a teacher, the uncertainty in funding has been an ongoing struggle for myself and for the profession. So every year we're having to lobby the government to renew the funding. Without that renewal of funding, we face significant job cuts. So myself, I'm the breadwinner in my family, and that would mean that a third of my hours would be cut and I would no longer be able to provide for my family. So that has a really big impact on me personally and also on the profession as well. Most people working in the kinder space are working part-time, so we're going to reduce a part-time workforce down to even less hours, which has a really big impact. For families, they have to hop on board every year and support us in lobbying the government for funding. I've had families that have had to do it 3 or 4 times to join in with the kindergarten to lobby for this funding, as each and every child comes through the kinder, and they are continually surprised that we have to do it again, but they do jump on board and they do help us lobby for this funding because they know the benefits for their children. The other flip side for families is that they're trying to work out their lives for the next year, and when we're telling them that we don't have the funding, we're not sure what the timetable will look like until we know if we have this funding. It means they can't plan their lives, they can't organise their work, they can't organise drop-off and pickups and extracurricular activities for their children. They're in limbo just as much as the teachers, and that creates really a significant amount of stress and uncertainty for them as well. And children, they're the ones missing out the most here, and that's why we're all here tonight. They face losing a third of their kindergarten time. We've already heard how important this time is for children, and this is time that they can't get back. The research is clear, it's out there. We already know the importance of investing in early childhood and what the outcomes are for children and communities and for future leaders. If we take away a third of this time, that's never coming back. They never get that back, and that's going to have an impact on them as they move through their schooling careers and also as they become citizens and take on roles in the community as well. I think what we need is long-term funding. We need funding that isn't handed out 1 or 2 years at a time. It needs to be free for 3 and 4-year-old children. And if we can deliver that, all the other things I've talked about will naturally come with it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Nichole, for that contribution. Also, thank you for your work. And while we don't organise ourselves as a society to elevate the status of teachers, in particular teachers in the early years, this is amongst the most important professions that work in our society. So thank you for your work, and thank you for all of you for the work that you do. Now it's over to your questions, and so keep them coming through the chat function. And one question that we have got, I think, will now be asked by Martel Menz. Martel, if you could, I think somebody will unmute you. If you do the same at your end, you should be able to. We should be able to see you.
Thank you, Jay. It's wonderful to hear all the speakers, so thanks to all of you. Look, my question was, how do we change the narrative, and how, politicians across all parties, I have to say, keep coming back to frame this issue as one of childcare. And we know that that's certainly how it's portrayed in the media. And I think picking up Jen's point before about care is one part of our early childhood education and care system, and it's just one part of what people do. It's a very important part, but it's not the only aspect to the work, the very important work of delivering high quality early learning and education. So how do we, in those conversations we have with politicians and media, how can we influence and shift the language? Because I think that would also have a very powerful impact on how society sees the important role of early childhood education, learning and care. Thank you.
Thank you, Martel. And that's a great question. It's one that comes up all the time on our campaign committee. And I might first just ask Jen Jackson to say a few words in response to that. And then what I'll do is try and give you a bit of an explanation about some of the sequence in language that we're hoping to use to try and win this campaign, and try and explain how these words all fit together with one another from a campaigning perspective. But the point you make is unarguably true. Of course, that's the system we want, is one that is more than childcare. So Jen, could you maybe just comment on the question of language?
Sure, Jay, and what a great question. I'm not going to have the right answer, but I can offer some reflections. I think it's about not making it an either or. I think what's really hard is when you've got a government focused on the care side and you're trying to bring them over to the education, or you've got one going the other way, and we've got, discourse around the relationship with schooling and how we manage that. So I think it's showing that inseparability. And a piece of research I really like on this comes from Karen Thorpe in Queensland, which showed that actually the thing that made the difference when you look at children's later NAPLAN scores, not that it's all about NAPLAN, but if you do, you find that the thing that made the difference in terms of the quality of the early childhood service that they attended, the thing that stood out was the quality of the relationships with the educators. Now, there's the connection between education and care. Care is part of the learning just as much as learning is part of the care. And I think that comes back to my point around really making visible the complexity and the skill of what it is that early childhood educators do. I've always said, because I'm a little bit biased, I think that there are things that early childhood teachers can teach other teachers at all levels of the education system about the centrality of relationships to learning. So I think rather than do the arm wrestle of are we doing care, are we doing education, it's creating that story that makes them both part of really complex professional and vital work.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. And if we ever needed a reminder that schools and what we currently call childcare, would probably prefer to call early education, do both. It was when all of these children were at home with their parents. They got a very clear understanding that schools were actually were providing both elements of support for families. But can I just give you a bit of an insight from the campaigning perspective? And I'll give you an example which is not about this campaign, but to actually show you how sometimes you might have to start with language. You have to start essentially where people are to take them to the place where you want them to be. So if the community thinks that this is childcare, that might be the language we need to use to talk to them, but eventually we're taking them on a journey to somewhere else. And I'll give you the example of a campaign that's probably very dear to Michele's heart, the Work Choices campaign. When the initial research was done on the Work Choices campaign, obviously there were great concerns about the Work Choices legislation, and in particular the way in which it was introducing individual contracts. But it's very hard for the trade union movement to message around collective contracts, individual contracts, even though that was one of the biggest threats contained in the Work Choices legislation. What they found from research is the thing that people understood very clearly and were very worried about was the removal of unfair dismissal rights. And many of you might recall that out of that woman who was on the telephone where the boss said that he had to come into work. And she said, well, what about the kids? And it was obvious the boss said, you come in and you lose your job. That was a very powerful way of cutting through to people in a way which they understood, that then allowed the next sequence in the messaging to actually become, well, if this is what Work Choices is about, then I'm listening to some of the other critiques you might have of legislation. So in much the same way, while we're beginning with childcare, and childcare seems to be front and centre, it's a way in which we can begin a conversation about the critical importance of the early years, and then build on that in a way which builds both coalitions and creates the pressure for change, which will allow us to address some of these other broader issues. So it might sound frustrating to hear us use the words childcare, but what we try to do is to also quickly follow that up with language which talks about the system that we want to have in the future. But we're very much, it is a sequence, and our language will shift as we detect the community's sort of understanding growing in this area. But it is a challenge to hold these two things together in tension as we seek to move from one state to the other. The ultimate goal is to win this campaign, and to do that we've got to build a broad coalition. And the truth is that we're not strong enough, the sector is not strong enough to win by itself. It needs to build a broad coalition across the Australian community if we're going to be successful in mobilising support for our efforts. Hopefully that triggers a few more questions. We have the next question though from Jan Murphy. Jan, could you ask your question now?
Sure, and thanks for the opportunity. Because of the insecure funding that's coming into this sector, we're experiencing quite low levels of, well, that's one of the factors why we have quite low levels of permanency in the preschool sector in South Australia. In particular for our ECWs, our early childhood workers who work in education support, their permanency here is less than 20%. There's also high levels of part-time work where people are seeking more, so underemployment is an issue as well. And I'm just wondering how this insecure work and underemployment will be included as part of the funding campaign.
I might ask Correna and then Michele to have a crack at that issue.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jane. Thanks, Jan, for your question. It's a sad and unfortunate truth that insecure employment is rife within our membership in terms of preschool education, and the figures that you've quoted there in terms of South Australia are very similar across the nation. There's a strong link in terms of recurrent funding for staffing. When departments and governments have ongoing funding, then we're more likely to be able to win permanency conversion campaigns and so on. So from our perspective, in terms of preschool funding now, campaigning to get secure funding is critically important, but the second component of the work that we have to do is the work that we do around enterprise bargaining through industrial relations in every state and territory to address the areas where we do have high levels of insecure employment, and to put in the industrial strategies to win changes industrially that guarantee people permanency and ongoing work. I'll hand over to Michele.
Thanks, Correna, and thanks for that question, Jan. And in answering it, actually, I'm partly answering your question, partly answering Nichole's from earlier as well, because this issue of insecure work is one that is rife in your sector, but it unfortunately is something that is touching every industry and every sector in the country. So that enormous rise of workers who are casual workers, contract workers, working for labour hire, there's basically no part of our labour market now where you don't see this big increase in insecure work. And of course, when the pandemic hit, that was why we saw such a massive number of people immediately on those Centrelink lines, because they were in insecure jobs and it was so easy to literally instantly get rid of them. So I think there's an opportunity in that, in the sense that I think that was a very shocking thing to many people. So the realisation that insecure jobs are actually damaging for our society and our economy is a really important part of what the ACTU and all unions are building into our campaigns now. And when I think about your work and what you do as teachers and support workers in this sector, it does go back to that issue about, well, how do you get people to think about the education and the quality of that, as well as the care, and change politicians and funders' attitude. And I think part of that is making those links about how people understand what it is that you're doing. And I just personally reflect that, having been involved a lot more in the last 6 months in working with early childhood educators and teachers and people like Jay and Correna and others in this campaign, I've learned so much about what happens in your work, and I've appreciated, and I thought I knew, right? Like I thought I understood it, but I've learned so much about what you do and those critical links in terms of what it means for children. So I think the more that we can make those links, that has parents understanding, because politicians won't change their mind till the public does. So have parents understanding that to get great quality education is critical in the preschool and early childhood years, so that your child has that very best chance and start, that education doesn't start with school, that it starts earlier. And the more we can get the general public and parents to see that connection, and back to you, Jan, that critical connection, that if you've got high turnover and, changing faces, changing people all the time, it immediately diminishes the quality of what you can do, and consequently the quality of the education and care that kids are getting. So I think joining these dots, getting parents as part of the campaign, because they understand, and Jen's research and others are so important in this, helping them understand and being able to say, well, actually, I need this to give my kids the best opportunity in future. It's the funding, but it's also the teachers and the educators having secure jobs.
Jen, thank you, Michele. Jen, I wonder whether you might be able to make a remark about this notion of insecure employment and the question of relationships between children and their educators.
Jay, I definitely reinforce what Michele just said about continuity of relationships being really critical for the quality and for delivering those benefits for learning. I think there's another theme that's coming through the comments as well that's relevant, which is the fact that the sector almost wasn't there. I mean, we know that the support came in the end, and it was desperately needed, and it was you know, possibly not always what it should have been, but the sector continued, and you guys stepped up and were there for children and families. But the fact that there was that moment, I think that's actually crystallized the importance of having a sector that is robust enough and that flows through from the services through to the individual educators, that this is an essential service, and governments can't leave an essential service to chance or to temporary arrangements.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Now, I'm going to go to Doreen in a minute, but before I do, I just noticed somebody's asked, how can we communicate about this campaign to families and members of the wider community as early childhood educators, and that they'd like to share what's happening so that we can grow participants to ensure the campaign is successful? Well, that's exactly what this is about. There is a campaign website, thriveby5.org.au. If you go there, you register, you'll get updates, and it creates a supported journey which allows you to get involved at whatever level you're comfortable, but it'll tell you what's going on. It'll have the key arguments that we're running, and you'll see how they change over time in the way I just described. But I'll now, if Doreen is able to just make a comment, I think she had a provocation she just wanted to put up and see how the panellists respond to it. Doreen? You'll be unmuted, and then you'll have to unmute at your end, I think. Or maybe you won't. Oh, there you go. There you go.
Hi. My
Hi,
apologies. My centre is still running, so that's why I'm running backwards and forwards, is because we have a lot on today. One of the things that strikes me is that, as I wrote in the comments, the structural barriers that we're facing are causing a lot of the process barriers that we are trying to deal with. So when, for example, the Australian government sends out an email or one of its regular newsletters which uses particular types of language, it's picked up and run with quite quickly. And one of the things that we're going to have to do over a period of time is understand the power of that kind of embedding of language and the power that it has to push us into certain directions of what we think about early childhood. The funding and policy and governance differences that we have between early childhood and school-based education are exacerbated by the small things like the use of that language as much as they are the large things like national partnership agreements. I think one of the things I'd like to hear from people is an agreement to go on that journey that Jay was talking about, an agreement to look at the language that is being used, an agreement to look about how it is keeping us apart so that we can develop some strategies on taking it forward. I hope that's quite clear. I've got 8 people in the background, so it's a little difficult.
No worries. Thank you, Doreen. Nichole, did you want to reflect on anything you've heard up to this point, or that remark?
Yeah, so I totally agree with that remark. Particularly here in Victoria, we've had different miscommunications happen because of what governments have put out in emails to services, and people interpreting that information quite differently, and then that causes confusion. So I can say that I've felt that myself, that sometimes if the language is different or not clear, it's creating more confusion than it is actually supporting services to understand what needs to be done at what time.
Excellent. Thank you, Nichole. There's another question that's come through from Megan O'Connell, who wants to explore the question of sort of unintended negative consequences by campaigning for increase in access. Megan, could you ask your question?
Sure, Jay. I'm just interested in how we can go about increasing access to early childhood education and care and making sure that's not at the expense of quality. And in particular, I guess part B of that, how do we build the workforce that we need to ensure all children get quality?
Thank you. That's a great question, and it's sort of very much on our minds. It's probably worth saying that the campaign, just to describe what the campaign looks like, and then I'll throw to Correna, who I'm sure has a point of view about that topic. But the campaign's got three sort of main spheres. One is the public-facing one, so the sort of things we say publicly to put pressure on politicians. The second one, though, is a sort of a more inside track about how to answer these difficult questions about, all right, if we create the pressure for change, how do we make sure that we transition from the system we have to the one that we want in a way that doesn't actually go backwards? Because there are some spectacular international examples of actually not necessarily going forwards just by expanding access. And I think your question goes to that. The third bit is how we maintain a connection between all the constituencies, all the bits and pieces, the early educators, the school teachers, you know, the social workers, the infant nurses, the paediatrician. There's a lot of people in the lives of families and children in those first 5 years. How do we round them all up and get them all on the same page? So we're working on each of those domains to try and work together. But Correna, could you maybe have a remark? And maybe Jen, do you know something about, I think there is some international examples of where this hasn't gone so well with expansion. Maybe you could remark on that, Correna?
Thanks, Jay, and thank you very much for the question. In terms of quality, there are no shortcuts here at all. From our perspective, the workforce must be fully qualified and trained, and that includes preschool teachers and education support personnel, and they must be supported by governments with ongoing professional learning. But also the other aspect of quality, of course, is for the children themselves. The NALS report and other reports have articulated this very clearly with respect to the fact that access to high quality early childhood education and care is not equal. We have children in our nation who are less likely to receive high quality provision, children from vulnerable and disadvantaged circumstances, children living in remote communities, children from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander backgrounds. And so from our perspective, in terms of the campaign, we have to continue to fight for and ensure that there is high quality provision for all, and that is funded for by all governments. Thanks, Jay.
Jen, did you thank you, Correna. Jen, did you have able to share something with us?
Sure. I think Jay's referring to a story I think I told you about. I was lucky enough to go to Europe back when you could, and talk to someone from Malta. And Malta has free universal early childhood services for everyone. And the other people from other countries go, oh, that's amazing. And she sort of rolled her eyes and said, yeah, it's great. If you've got a garage and you write early childhood above the door, you can offer a service. Now she was exaggerating, but what she was saying is, even when you've got a government that's very supportive of this universal access agenda, you have to keep the quality absolutely front and centre. I'm going to throw in another quick insight, Jay, because I've also just come off a major piece of research around skills shortages. And this is another example of where early childhood can work with other players to tell its story. And the people who train the early childhood workforce, the people who are teacher educators and train the TAFEs as well, train at the TAFEs, where there's a skills shortage, there's going to be government interest. And there's a lot of modelling coming out around skills shortages in early childhood. So I think that question, Megan, you asked around how we create not only enough of a workforce, but also a really highly skilled quality workforce, should be front of mind with a lot of governments at the moment.
Thank you, Jen. And just to back that up, I think one of the people on the call has also said that quality is complex because it means different things to different communities. So we have to ensure that whatever happens, it's as flexible as the curriculum framework has been. And I think Martel, who spoke earlier, noted that we've seen the watering down of qualification requirements by stealth before. We're going to have to hold all governments to account on the quality issue and upholding integrity and qualifications. And I say that there's probably a bit of a tendency from governments to want, in a world of sort of limited resources, they like to spread, services like margarine over a large number of people rather than actually. So I think this will be an ongoing tension that has to be held in the demands. And certainly as part of the campaign is not just about universal access, it's about a universal high quality access. And embedded in that is a whole range of ideas about a supported and valued workforce. Can I now, maybe Nichole, did you have a perspective on the question of how to the importance of maintaining skills and capabilities and training amongst your workforce and how difficult that is even under the current system?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things is retaining and attracting staff. And I think that comes with the pay and conditions that are offered. If you're going to offer really good conditions and pay, you will attract the right people to the roles, but definitely ensuring that when people are trained that it is high quality and that they get lots of experience in the classrooms, not just the learning that happens at universities. When I have student teachers come out and observe my program, they're often saying that they want more time with professionals in the classroom. And I think that we need to do more to allow that to happen, because that's really valuable for them to see how classrooms operate in the real world, as alongside of getting formal learning as well.
Thank you for that. And there's lots of really interesting remarks that are being made about qualifications, career development, and the relationship with quality and what quality actually looks like in this context. And I wonder, did any of the speakers have anything else they wanted to contribute on that topic?
I just wanted to say the other thing that's been in the comments, which is so true, is that it's about pay and conditions and the link between entitlements and pay and conditions and the professionalism and quality of the work. So if we don't win those industrial battles to make sure that we can actually have genuine claims for pay equity that revalue and properly value this work, as well as making sure that we can have collective bargaining that is getting the real decision makers at the table. And critical to that when it's publicly funded is that you don't just have the individual providers of the services, but you get the funders there too. Because if we can't have that sort of industry and sector-wide bargaining, then which is so limited in Australia at the moment, then that's always going to hold back our capacity to properly win the important recognition you need in your pay and conditions, which will continue to attract people and of course keep people in these jobs too. So that link is a critical part of what we need to fight for too, Jay.
Thank you for that, Michele. I think it's probably, I think, in the sort of 5 minutes that we have remaining, I think it's possibly important for us to talk about the campaign itself and whether people have any questions about it. I think it's worth, I think, understanding that the campaign is not owned by any one group. Obviously, it's supported and brought to you by the initiative that I work for, Thrive by 5, within the Minderoo Foundation. I know many of you may not be aware of the Minderoo Foundation, but it is a philanthropic foundation that operates out of Perth. It's somewhat controversially, the principals are, of course, Andrew and Nicola Forrest, and Andrew Forrest does have some perspectives on things that might not necessarily accord with everybody's in this room, but at least on this question of early childhood, there is common cause. And I think one of the things that we've had in the past is we've always had good arguments The arguments have always been impeccable on this topic. What we haven't had is a properly resourced national campaign that it's allowed us to actually create sufficient pressure to get politicians to act. And so that's what we've been able to bring together here. I think a very broad coalition of business groups, unions, researchers, educators, and the broader Australian community. I think this is a winning campaign. I mean, the arguments that we can marshal and the coalition that we build, I think, is a very powerful one. So if anybody does have any questions about the campaign itself and how it's likely to progress, don't hesitate to advance those questions as well, because it will only be, the campaign is based on a philosophy of many voices but one message. It is a broad sector covering lots of different subsystems in the early childhood space, but trying to speak together with one voice is obviously difficult, but quite essential if we're to run an effective campaign. Now, I think some people have been noting that there's an important relationship between the training and education sectors. Jen, coming fresh out of that sector, did you have any observations about both the tertiary systems and their relationship to education in this area?
I think those questions have really got to the importance of practitioners and teacher educators and TAFEs and other trainers working together, and the total irreplaceability of that hands-on experience and learning how to educate and care for young children. But Jay, I want to ask you something. There are lots of really terrific questions in this chat that makes me think that this discussion could have gone on for a lot longer. Could we possibly have the opportunity to work with you and as a panel create some answers offline that we then shoot through, so people who've asked a good question have the chance for a follow-up?
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great idea, Jen. So we'll capture all of these and do as Jen suggests, because there's many thoughtful questions that we haven't been able to deal with. One that just popped up before, which is a pretty obvious one in some ways, and is that we're dealing with a group of educators and teachers, and there's a school system that obviously is a counterpart system to what we presently call an early years system. There's obviously a massive relationship that exists between them. In some cases, they're co-located on school sites, but I suppose from our perspective, the system that we imagine is one that's connected to the public education system. From our perspective, we can't see why we have a funded public education system. We can't have a public early years system, which is a counterpart system, rewarding and respecting the workforce in that sector in the same way as we attempt to do amongst our teachers. So there's obviously, teachers have a massive capacity to influence parents. They're trusted, and parents go to them for information and advice. So in a way, the critical vector of communication really has to come from educators. They're the trusted source of information. So it's hard to imagine a successful campaign without the buy-in of educators. So that's a really critically important point. I might just throw to each of our panelists for any final words. Correna.
Thanks, Jay. Look, I'd really like to reiterate what you've said about this campaign. This is a campaign that belongs to all of us, and I think it has a huge, huge capacity in terms of achieving the win that many of us who've been working on our own campaigns in this area for many years now have been seeking. So from the AEU's perspective, we're very pleased to be involved with Thrive by 5 at campaigning for early education and care for all of our children. And I think that the next year or two are going to be very exciting in this space as we work together. I'd also just like to give a plug to the fact that we've got a Preschool Funding Now Facebook page. So if anyone's interested in following that, you can go and find it on Facebook. I think the link might be in the chat. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Michele?
Thanks, Jay. Look, I just want to end by saying an enormous thank you on behalf of all of the union members across every union in the country who've relied on you and the work that you've done this year more than any year in terms of caring for our children and educating our children. And I can only imagine how difficult that has been. But I do want you to know that when we talk about this issue, and it was one of those 5 key issues that we had in our National Economic Reconstruction Plan, the support that you have and this sector has and your union has across all of the other unions and workers in this country is enormous. So we're really pleased to be part of the Thrive by 5 campaign and to work with you and the AEU to win this. Thanks, Jane.
Jen.
I want to reiterate something Correna said. A lot of people on this call have been working in this sector a long time. You will have seen a lot of campaigns. You will have seen a lot of policy change. You're wearing all that alongside everything else you do. And this year you carried a pandemic as well. So you might be looking at this going, another campaign, where's it going to go? Inevitably, things will go wrong along the way. Inevitably, some of the changes will work, some of them won't, some of them will take time to bed down. I have tremendous admiration for the resilience of this sector, and I think it's driven by the strong sense of commitment to what you will do. So it's always a privilege to talk to a group of educators, as I said, and it's a real privilege to be part of the campaign, and I hope we can get some good stuff done for you.
Great. I think it's appropriate to end with an educator, somebody who works in the sector, to take us out with some final words. Thank you, Nichole.
Thanks, Jay. I don't really have a lot more to add. The one thing that I probably haven't spoken about tonight that's probably in the back of lots of teachers and educators' mind is how these kind of changes can affect workload. So in moving forward, I think that we've talked about pay and conditions, but one of the really important things is that workload is reduced for teachers and educators, because if we get universal funding, we need to make sure that the quality is there, like we've spoken about, but it won't be there if teachers are feeling overwhelmed, stress, or leave the profession because the workload is just unachievable. So thank you all for listening to me tonight and for the opportunity to share my perspective with you all.
Okay, well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to all of our speakers, Correna, Michele, Jen and Nichole. Thank you all for joining us and being part of this information session, really, about the campaign. We really encourage you to join. We know that this campaign will only succeed if it has the support and enthusiasm of educators. It's your campaign. It's for you and principally, of course, it's for the children that you educate so beautifully every day. So thank you so much for joining us all today. We will get back to you with your answers to your questions. Please stay engaged and watch this space. I think this is a campaign that's capable of being won, but like most campaigns, it will require unity of purpose and applying the necessary pressure to the political process. So thank you so much for being part of it.